I cared for my uncle for years, but his will left everything to the one who didn't deserve it. And now the truth is coming out. The day of the will reading was supposed to bring closure. Instead, it tore open wounds I didn't even know existed. We gathered in the old oak-paneled office of my late uncle's lawyer, the air thick with a mix of grief, tension, and unspoken curiosity. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. I sat between two cousins, both of them whispering nervously, their hands fidgeting with the hems of their jackets. My uncle had been a complicated man, stern to some, kind to others, but no one doubted that I had been closest to him in his final years. I was there when his health declined. I handled his errands, sat with him during hospital visits, even kept him company on long evenings when he couldn't sleep. Everyone expected my name to be central in the will, if not the primary beneficiary. When the lawyer finally began reading, the silence was almost unbearable. Line after line listed small bequests, trinkets, heirlooms, modest sums left to various relatives. My pulse quickened when the lawyer's voice reached my name. This was the moment. This was it. But instead of hearing what I'd imagined for months, my stomach dropped. He left me a wristwatch. A simple, worn wristwatch he used to wear in his workshop. That was all. My name, spoken clearly, followed by a few flat words. To him, I leave my old watch, as a token of time spent together. A wave of confusion rippled across the room. Heads turned toward me, eyes widening in disbelief. Even the lawyer hesitated for a fraction of a second before continuing. And then came the blow that froze the air completely. My uncle's entire estate, the house, the savings, the business shares, was left to someone else. Someone none of us expected. The sound of that name hung in the room like a thunderclap. My heart pounded against my ribs, my palms damp with sweat. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. The man I had devoted years of my life to caring for had left me nothing more than a relic of his past, while giving everything else to the least deserving person imaginable. The words of the will replayed in my head. I couldn't stop thinking back to the years I had spent by my uncle's side. Our bond wasn't just surface level or born out of convenience. It was built over late nights, long talks, and countless small acts of care that no one else bothered with. When my uncle's health first began to falter, most of the family kept their distance. They had excuses, jobs, kids, other obligations. Some didn't even bother to hide their indifference. But I couldn't ignore him. I still remember the first time I drove him to the hospital when he had trouble breathing. His hands shook as he gripped the car door, and I remember the way he muttered, "Don't let them put me in one of those homes." I promised him right then that I wouldn't, and I kept that promise that I visited his house almost daily. I fixed broken shelves, cooked meals when he was too weak to stand at the stove, and sat with him through his endless stories about the past. He loved recounting how he built his small business from scratch, how every scar on his hands had a story behind it. Sometimes he was cranky, even harsh, but I never walked away. I learned how to read his moods, when to argue and when to just let him ramble. There were nights I'd be there until dawn, keeping him company because he couldn't sleep alone. When his memory started slipping, I helped manage his bills and even dealt with the lawyers when he got too confused by the paperwork. Everyone in the family saw this. It wasn't a secret. I was the one holding things together. Even neighbors, people outside the family, would pull me aside and whisper, "You're the only one who really looks after him." So when I heard my name in the will, only to be dismissed with a single item, it felt like reality itself had betrayed me. That watch was more than just a watch. It was a reminder of time spent together, yes, but it also felt like a cruel joke. As if all those years of loyalty, patience, and sacrifice had been boiled down into a token gesture. The murmurs in the room grew louder, and I caught glimpses of sympathy in the eyes of some cousins. They knew. They had seen it. I wasn't greedy. I never asked for recognition. But everyone assumed, with reason, that my uncle understood the depth of what I had given. And now, the will suggested otherwise, and beneath my shock, something darker started to simmer. If this wasn't just a mistake, then someone had made it happen. The name that followed mine in the will made my stomach twist. Everything, my uncle's house, savings, business shares, was left to Mark, my cousin. Mark, of all people. If you don't know him, let me paint the picture. Mark was the kind of relative who showed up late to family gatherings, left early, and somehow managed to make those few hours about himself. He never lifted a finger when my uncle needed help. In fact, I can't remember the last time Mark even visited without some hidden motive. The man treated my uncle like a bank he could withdraw from whenever life got too inconvenient. That I remember one particular evening, years ago. My uncle had just come out of surgery, groggy and weak. I was sitting at his bedside when Mark strolled in, not with flowers, not even with a kind word, just paperwork. Loan requests. My uncle, too tired to argue, signed off because he didn't have the energy to fight. I remember seething in silence, clenching my fists under the table because I knew Mark was leeching off him. And now, this same man was the heir to everything. The room reacted instantly. A few of my relatives gasped openly. Others exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. One of my aunts even whispered, not quietly enough, "How could he leave it all to Mark? That boy never cared about him." Mark, of course, sat there smirking like a cat that had finally caught the canary. He didn't even bother to hide it. His eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge what had just been declared. That I felt heat rising in my chest. Not because I wanted wealth or property for myself, but because it was wrong. Mark hadn't earned it. He had avoided every responsibility, mocked every sacrifice, and now he was being rewarded as if he were the devoted one. And the worst part? The smug satisfaction on his face told me he knew exactly how undeserving he was. The room erupted into whispers, murmurs, and incredulous gasps. Some of my relatives immediately turned to me with wide eyes, silently begging me to say something. I could see the judgment in their faces, the understanding that I had sacrificed more than anyone else and now faced this cruel twist. That a few cousins shook their heads, muttering under their breaths, "This can't be real. He never helped, never visited." Then came the silent observers, those who usually avoided taking sides. They shifted in their chairs, unsure how to react, caught between not wanting to offend Mark and not wanting to betray the truth. You could almost feel the tension ripple through the air, thick and suffocating. One of my aunts finally broke the silence, her voice sharp, cutting through the murmurs. "Mark, are you serious? After everything we've seen over the years?" He barely even knew our uncle. Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smug, as if daring anyone to challenge him. He even smirked at my aunt, the kind of smirk that made it clear he was relishing the chaos he had caused. That I looked around the room and caught glimpses of people who had silently witnessed my dedication. They nodded subtly, their expressions a mixture of pity and outrage. A neighbor who had helped our uncle in the past whispered to another, "He's always been there. Nobody else did half of what he did." The contrast between Mark's entitlement and my years of effort couldn't have been starker. And that contrast was not lost on anyone who truly knew the truth. As the lawyer continued reading the remaining parts of the will, I felt a storm brewing inside me. Anger, disbelief, and a sharp sense of injustice collided, making it impossible to stay calm. The betrayal wasn't just about property. It was about recognition, about fairness, about seeing a lifetime of devotion thrown aside. And in that room, filled with tension and unspoken judgments, I realized this would not be the end of the conflict. I couldn't stay silent any longer. My throat felt dry, my hands clenched into fists under the table. Every instinct screamed at me to speak, to challenge this blatant injustice. "Mark," I began, my voice shaking but firm, "how could you accept this? You never visited, never helped, never even cared. You." I stopped myself, taking a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "You didn't earn any of this." He looked at me with that same smug expression, tilting his head slightly. "Earned it," he said, his voice smooth and irritatingly calm. "The will is clear. Your uncle chose me. It's not about who helped him. It's about what he wanted." My blood boiled. What he wanted. Everyone knew I was the one who cared for him when no one else did. Everyone saw it. A few relatives muttered agreement under their breath. I could see the mix of shock and anger on their faces, some trying to hold back tears. One cousin whispered, "He's right. He did everything for him." Mark laughed softly, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Look, I didn't write the will. I didn't influence him. Stop acting like it's a personal vendetta. You're just upset because life isn't fair." I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Unfair? This is more than unfair. This is betrayal. Years of dedication, care, sleepless nights, reduced to a single watch. Is that supposed to make me feel grateful?" The tension in the room was electric. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to place their loyalty, while others openly stared at Mark, their disapproval plain. I realized then that this confrontation wasn't just about me and Mark. It had become a test for everyone else. Would they side with the truth, or with the convenient narrative that ignored years of effort? Mark's smirk didn't falter. You can yell, scream, or cry. Doesn't change the facts. The will stands. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. Words were my weapon now, and I was just getting started. After the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. The will seemed too neat, too final, too designed to shock. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories and overheard conversations. There had to be more beneath the surface. I started recalling subtle oddities. The time Mark had shown up at my uncle's house with legal papers that seemed rushed, or when he lingered suspiciously during family meetings, asking questions no one else would have cared about. There were whispers I had dismissed as gossip at the time, mentions of late-night calls and secret visits to my uncle. Could someone have influenced the will? Manipulated the circumstances to favor him? I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The idea seemed almost absurd, yet it explained too much. That I remembered a conversation with my uncle a few months before he passed. He had spoken vaguely about making things right, but I had assumed he meant leaving the house in good hands. Now I wondered if Mark had twisted those words, if some unseen hand had nudged my uncle's decisions in a way that ensured the inheritance would fall into the wrong hands. Even the lawyer's careful phrasing during the reading felt rehearsed, too calm, too deliberate, as if he knew the shock would be part of the plan. I started jotting down everything I could remember, tracing back the last year of interactions, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might reveal a hidden scheme. Every memory I revisited carried a new sting. That casual smile Mark had flashed when visiting my uncle now seemed deliberate, calculated. The whispered comments in the hallway from a distant cousin, once brushed off, now rang like warnings. The seed of doubt had taken root, and I realized the inheritance battle was more than just about property. It was about uncovering the truth behind a carefully constructed betrayal, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the hidden layers of betrayal. A few relatives and friends began to speak up. Their voices were hesitant at first, almost as if they were testing the waters, but soon they grew louder, clearer, and more assertive. "Aren't you forgetting all he did for Uncle?" My cousin whispered sharply, leaning closer. "You were there when we weren't. You didn't just care, you lived for him." Another relative, an aunt who rarely involved herself in family disputes, cleared her throat. "It's true. Everyone here saw what he did. And now this. It's wrong. This isn't what Uncle would have wanted." Even neighbors who had known my uncle well over the years approached cautiously, offering their own observations. "He always counted on you," one whispered. "Mark? Not once did he visit when your uncle needed help. Not once." The collective support was like a surge of electricity through the room. It didn't erase the initial shock, but it validated my feelings, giving me courage I hadn't felt in hours. People were quietly taking my side, their words confirming what I already knew in my heart. I hadn't been greedy or entitled. I had been devoted, and everyone who truly understood the situation recognized that I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the battle wasn't lost yet. The support of these witnesses, people outside the formalities of the will, might be the key to challenging the injustice. I realized that their testimonies, their memories of my actions and dedication, could provide leverage to question Mark's undeserved inheritance. But as encouraging as it was, the room still contained tension. Mark remained unshaken, his smug demeanor intact. And while some were speaking up, others still hesitated, afraid to confront him or risk creating a family rift. The mixture of support and uncertainty made me realize this fight wouldn't be easy. I wasn't just up against a single person who had manipulated circumstances. I was up against the inertia of family politics, old grudges, and the fear of speaking uncomfortable truths. Yet for the first time since the will was read, I felt a spark of determination. With allies quietly at my side, I could face what came next, and I wouldn't back down. Mark sat back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like a king surveying his conquered kingdom. Every word he had spoken, every smug glance he threw, fueled the fire simmering inside me. "You all seem upset," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't get it. The will is perfectly clear. Your uncle knew what he was doing." I gritted my teeth, my palms pressing into the arms of my chair. Clear? Clear to favor someone who never cared about him? Someone who treated him like a tool? I shot back, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. Mark laughed lightly, as if my anger was entertaining. "You think being nice earns you a mansion or shares in a business? Life doesn't work that way. You did your part, sure, but the rest is out of your control." That phrase cut deeper than any blow could. Years of dedication, nights spent at his side when everyone else walked away, reduced to a shrug. As if my care and loyalty were meaningless in the grand scheme of inheritance law. Around us, murmurs rose again. Some family members exchanged uneasy glances. Others whispered that Mark's arrogance was unbearable, even insulting. I could feel their frustration, their outrage simmering beneath polite nods and forced silences. That I caught the briefest flicker of doubt in Mark's eyes when several relatives began quietly recounting my sacrifices. But he quickly covered it with a laugh and a shake of his head. The confidence of someone used to manipulation, used to taking what wasn't rightfully theirs. That I realized then that this wasn't just about the inheritance. This was about pride, control, and Mark's belief that he could intimidate anyone into acceptance. The arrogance wasn't merely irritating, it was dangerous. It threatened to overshadow the truth, to make everyone question their own memories, their own sense of justice. That I clenched my fists under the table, knowing that confronting Mark directly again might only escalate things, but also understanding that doing nothing would let his arrogance define the narrative. The fight was far from over, and I had to find a way to turn his confidence into vulnerability. After hearing Mark's arrogant words and seeing the reactions around the room, I felt a storm of conflicting emotions raging inside me. Anger was the loudest at first, fiery and consuming, but beneath it were layers of hurt, confusion, and an unsettling sense of doubt. Was I wrong to expect fairness? Had I misread my uncle's intentions? All those years I spent by his side, the sacrifices, the nights I gave up sleep, the errands, the endless care, had it all been in vain? A small, bitter voice in my mind whispered that maybe I had overestimated my place in his heart. And yet, that voice was drowned by another, louder, more insistent. I knew what I had done. I had been present when no one else was. I had acted out of love and duty, not expectation or greed. Everyone who truly knew the truth, everyone who had witnessed my devotion, agreed. I wasn't imagining my role in my uncle's life, but doubt is a sly companion. It crept in when I saw the murmurs of hesitation among other family members. Some nodded subtly in my support, yes, but others seemed uncertain, as if the allure of the inheritance had clouded their judgment. Could I really sway them? Could I prove what was right without tearing apart what little remained of family unity? The anger persisted, sharp and relentless, but now it was tinged with sadness. Sadness for the injustice of it all, for the family dynamics poisoned by greed, for the fact that Mark could smile while everyone else struggled to process the betrayal. And then came the fear. Not for myself, though part of me feared what this fight might cost, but fear that the truth would be buried under arrogance, manipulation, and false appearances. That Mark's undeserved claim would become the accepted reality, and my years of care and sacrifice would be erased in the family's collective memory. That I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind inside me. I couldn't let fear or doubt dictate my next move. I had to be strategic, thoughtful, and relentless. The inheritance wasn't just about property. It was about justice, about truth, about preserving the legacy of my uncle in the way he would have wanted. And as I sat there, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me, I realized one thing. I wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. Determined not to let Mark's arrogance and manipulation win, I started retracing every interaction, every decision, every quiet moment I had spent with my uncle. I pulled out old emails, text messages, even photographs, anything that could piece together a timeline of my dedication. That I spoke to neighbors who had watched over my uncle when I was at work or running errands. "He always counted on you," one said. "Mark? He never asked how he was doing, never checked in." The words fueled my resolve. Each conversation revealed small, crucial details, late-night visits I hadn't thought to document, bills I had handled to ease my uncle's burden, tasks that no one else would notice but that had made a huge difference in his life. Even some of the relatives who had initially remained silent began cautiously admitting their observations. I noticed how he took care of everything. A cousin whispered. Even when Mark was around, he just watched. He didn't lift a finger. I began compiling all of it, carefully organizing the evidence. I knew it wasn't just about proving Mark undeserving. It was about showing the court, the lawyer, and the rest of the family that my years of devotion had tangible, undeniable weight. But as I dug deeper, another layer of unease emerged. I discovered financial documents and legal notes that suggested someone may have influenced my uncle's decisions, subtle, behind-the-scenes manipulations that could explain Mark's sudden prominence in the will. I realized this wasn't simply a matter of favoritism. It was possibly orchestrated by someone with motives hidden from everyone else. The more I uncovered, the more intense my sense of urgency became. This was no longer just a fight to reclaim what I deserved. It was a fight to expose a web of deception that could taint the entire family, distort the legacy of my uncle, and let a lie take the place of years of truth that I spent hours connecting dots, making lists, tracking inconsistencies. Each revelation fueled both my frustration and determination. The stakes were higher than I'd realized, and I understood that patience, strategy, and careful planning would be just as important as passion and outrage to be by the end of the day. I had a clear plan forming in my mind, a path to confront the deceit, challenge the inheritance, and ensure that truth and justice would finally prevail. Armed with my notes, evidence, and the support of a few trusted relatives, I decided it was time to confront Mark directly. The tension in the air was suffocating, each step I took toward him feeling heavier than the last. He was leaning casually against the mantel, swirling a glass of wine, his smirk as infuriating as ever. "Back again?" he asked, feigning innocence. "Planning to yell some more?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "This isn't about yelling," I said firmly, placing my folder on the table. "It's about truth. Look at this. Look at what I did for Uncle, what I sacrificed, and compare it to your so-called devotion." Mark glanced at the folder, then back at me, his expression flickering between amusement and mild concern. "Impressive collection of papers," he said lightly. "Does it change anything?" "Yes," I snapped, the word sharper than intended. "It proves that you didn't earn any of this. You didn't care for him, not really. And if you think this arrogance, this smug confidence, is enough to silence everyone else, you're wrong." Some relatives watched silently, their eyes shifting between us. I could feel their support subtly, giving me strength. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to sense the shift. His smirk faltered ever so slightly as whispers of my evidence and dedication started circulating among the observers. "You really think these anecdotes will undo the will?" he asked, trying to regain control. "You're wasting your time." I leaned closer, my voice steady and cold. "It's not about wasting time. It's about exposing the truth. And whether the law sides with me or not, everyone here knows what's right. You can't hide behind arrogance forever." The room was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers and shallow breaths. For the first time, I saw Mark hesitate, not a full crack, but a flicker of doubt. It was enough to know that the tide might finally be turning, and that my persistence could have real consequences. After confronting Mark, I knew I needed more than just evidence of my devotion. I needed proof of manipulation. I started digging deeper into financial documents, emails, and conversations I'd overheard over the past year. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Late-night calls, hidden meetings, and subtle legal nudges had all worked in Mark's favor. Someone had orchestrated the circumstances to make him appear deserving. Each piece I uncovered made my stomach churn. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. I confronted one of the distant relatives who had always sided silently with Mark. At first, they tried to deny it. "I don't know what you mean," they muttered. But the evidence was undeniable. Emails, notes, and accounts of secret favors and whispered suggestions. Slowly, they admitted it. Mark hadn't acted alone. Someone had steered the decisions behind the scenes, ensuring the inheritance landed in the wrong hands. The revelation sent shockwaves through the family. Eyes darted nervously, murmurs filled the room, and the once confident Mark now seemed uncertain. The arrogance that had shielded him was slipping. Replaced by a flicker of fear, he tried unsuccessfully to hide that I realized then that the fight wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about exposing the truth to everyone who had been misled. It was about unmasking the orchestrator behind Mark's undeserved position and restoring a sense of justice for my uncle. With the web of manipulation finally uncovered, I felt a renewed determination. This wasn't the end, it was the turning point. I knew what had to be done to correct the wrongs, and I was ready to face whatever challenges came next. With the manipulation exposed, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Relatives who had remained silent now murmured their shock, some expressing regret for having allowed the deceit to go unnoticed. Mark sat frozen, his earlier confidence crumbling as the truth spread that I presented all the evidence to the family and the lawyer, the hidden meetings, emails, notes, and witness testimonies that documented my dedication and Mark's opportunism. The room was tense, each revelation hitting like a thunderclap, and the balance of power began to tilt. Mark tried to argue, to maintain control, but his words fell flat. The weight of facts, coupled with the undeniable support from everyone who had witnessed my actions, left him isolated. The arrogance that had defined him vanished, replaced by frustration and disbelief. Finally, the lawyer acknowledged the irregularities in how the will had been influenced. Discussions ensued, and after careful deliberation, adjustments were made to honor my uncle's true intentions. While the legal process would continue, the family now recognized that the inheritance should reflect dedication, care, and genuine connection, not manipulation. That I felt a profound mixture of relief and vindication. Years of loyalty and sacrifice had been acknowledged, not just by the law, but by the people who mattered most. More importantly, the integrity of my uncle's legacy was restored, and the family had an opportunity to rebuild trust after the deception. I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me. I realized something else. The journey had strengthened relationships that truly mattered. While greed and deceit had tested us, honesty, courage, and perseverance had prevailed. That Mark's defeat was not a triumph of spite, but a reaffirmation of what was right. And in that moment, I understood that justice wasn't just about inheritance. It was about truth, accountability, and the bonds that defined family.